My father looked me in the eye and said, "If we have to choose between keeping your brother out of prison or paying for your surgery, you already know the answer." My mother was sitting right there. She didn't say a word. I remember thinking, okay, now I know exactly where I stand. Let me back up. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and gave enough, my family would eventually see me. Not as the responsible one, not as the one who handles things, just as their daughter. I was wrong. And honestly, the moment I accepted that, everything changed. I grew up in a house where my brother Donnie could do no wrong. That's not me being dramatic. That's just the truth. Donnie was 4 years younger than me, and from the time he was a kid, he had this gift for making disaster look like someone else's fault. Failed a class, the teacher was unfair, got into a fight, the other kid started it, wrecked the car at 19, the road was wet. My parents bought every single excuse, every time. I was the opposite. I got good grades because I actually studied. I stayed out of trouble because I genuinely didn't want to cause problems. I worked a part-time job through high school, paid my own way through college, and landed a job as a physical therapist at 30. I was proud of that. I built it myself. But here's what I didn't realize until much later, in my family. Being capable wasn't a compliment. It was a permission slip. If Rachel can handle it, let Rachel handle it. If Rachel doesn't need help, don't offer any. It started small. My parents owned rental property, a duplex they bought years ago as an investment. They were never great at the paperwork side of things, and when I mentioned I knew how to handle lease agreements and tax filings from a continuing education class I had taken, my mother's face lit up like I'd just volunteered to do it forever. So I did. Every year. For 6 years. For free. Then Donnie decided he wanted to invest in something. I put that in quotes because what he actually did was convince my parents to co-sign on a business loan for a food truck. I sat across from them at the kitchen table and said, "I don't think this is a good idea. His credit is bad. He's never held a job for more than a year. This could come back on you." My mother said, "You're too hard on him." My father said, "He just needs a chance." The food truck lasted 8 months. The loan didn't go away. I didn't say I told you so. I just kept doing their taxes and lease renewals and quietly paid the late fee on their property insurance one time when they forgot, because I couldn't stand watching them lose something they'd worked for. I told myself I was doing it out of love. And maybe I was, but I was also doing it because somewhere deep down, I thought eventually they'd recognize it. 3 years ago, things got worse. Donnie got into trouble, real trouble. I won't go into every detail because it's not my story to tell in full, but he'd gotten mixed up with some people he shouldn't have, and there were legal fees, a lot of them. My parents called me on a Thursday night. My mother was crying. My father's voice had that flat, hollow tone it gets when he's already made a decision and is just going through the motions of telling you about it. "We're using the savings," he said. "We have to get Donnie an attorney." I asked how much. He told me. It was almost everything they had set aside. The number hit me somewhere in my chest. Not because I thought it was my money, it wasn't. They could do what they wanted with it. But I'd watched them build that account for 15 years, and it was gone in one conversation. "Okay," I said. "Is there anything I can do to help?" They said no. They just needed me to keep handling the rental property stuff while this was going on since they were too stressed to deal with paperwork. I said okay. About 6 months later, I started having pain in my knee. Not unusual. I'm on my feet constantly at work, moving with patients, doing transfers. I figured it was overuse. I stretched more, wore better shoes, kept going. By month 8, I was limping by the end of a shift. When I finally got an MRI, the orthopedic surgeon sat across from me and explained that I had a torn meniscus with some additional cartilage damage that had probably been worsening for a while. She said I needed surgery, not might benefit from. Needed. Then she told me the cost. My insurance covered most of it, but I had a high deductible. I'd picked the lower premium plan because I was paying off student loans and trying to save money at the same time. After insurance, I was looking at around $4,000 out of pocket. I had about 2,000 in savings at the time. I'd been using the rest to chip away at my loans and cover some unexpected car repairs earlier that year. $4,000. I want you to hold that number in your mind. I called my mother on a Sunday afternoon. I explained the situation calmly. I told her about the surgery, about what the surgeon said, about the recovery timeline, about the gap and what I could cover. I wasn't asking for the whole thing. I said if they could help me with half, I could figure out the rest somehow. Maybe a payment plan with the hospital, maybe a small personal loan. There was a pause. Then my mother said, "Oh, honey, I don't know. Things are still really tight after everything with Donnie." I told her I understood, but this was a medical necessity. I wasn't buying something I wanted. I was trying to keep my knee functional so I could keep working. She said she'd talk to my father. They called me back 2 days later, together, on speaker, which is never a good sign. My father said they'd thought about it and they just didn't have the money right now. He said maybe I could look into a payment plan. He said maybe I should have had a better emergency fund. And I need you to understand that I have replayed this moment in my head more times than I can count. He said, "Look, if we had to choose between helping Donnie stay out of real legal trouble or covering a surgery that isn't an emergency, you know we're going to do what we have to do for him. You're capable. You'll figure it out." I said, "Dad, my surgeon said I need this surgery." He said, "You're not dying, Rachel." My mother was quiet. I sat there on my couch for a long time after we hung up. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there and thought about 6 years of lease agreements. I thought about the insurance late fee I'd paid out of my own pocket so they wouldn't have a lapse in coverage. I thought about the dozens of phone calls I'd answered, the spreadsheets I'd maintained, the filing deadlines I'd tracked. I thought about every time I'd shown up, and then I thought about what my father had just said. "You're not dying, Rachel. I want to tell you that I immediately made some bold, empowered decision." But that's not what happened. What actually happened is I went to work the next morning, limped through a full shift, went home, made pasta, and cried in my shower. Then I slept on it for a week. I want you to think about something. If I had stopped managing their rental property, do you know what would have happened? The lease with their tenant was coming up for renewal in 3 months. There were repairs that needed to be documented for tax purposes. Their property tax filing had a deadline in 6 weeks. None of that was in my father's mind when he told me I'd figure it out. Here's what I decided. I wasn't going to make a speech. I wasn't going to call them crying or angry or asking them to reconsider. I wasn't going to give them a list of everything I'd done for them, because honestly, people who see you as a resource don't respond to lists. They just update the spreadsheet. "Oh, Rachel's upset. Better wait a few weeks until she calms down. She'll still be here." I decided to simply stop. I called the tenant myself. I let her know that effective immediately, any questions about the lease or the property should go directly to the landlords, my parents, and I gave her their phone number. I sent my parents a short email explaining that I was stepping back from managing the property due to personal reasons and that all current files were up to date through the previous month. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I just stopped. Then I called the hospital and worked out a payment plan on my own. It stretched me thin, but I made it work. I looked into whether my employer's flexible spending account could help with any of it. I picked up 2 extra shifts a month for 4 months. I did what I had to do the way I'd always done. My surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday. I didn't tell my parents. The recovery was harder than I expected. I was on crutches for 3 weeks, doing my own at-home PT exercises because I knew what I was doing and I couldn't exactly go into work as a patient. A friend from work came over twice to help me with groceries. My neighbor, a retired woman in her 70s who I'd helped carry things up the stairs for years, made me soup twice without me asking. My parents called once in that first week. My mother asked how I was doing. I said I was recovering from surgery. She said, "Oh, you went ahead and did it? Like it was elective, like it was a whim." I said yes and changed the subject. About 6 weeks after my surgery, my mother called again. This time, her voice was different, tighter, like she was trying to control something. "We got a notice from the tenant," she said. "She's been calling the number you gave her, but your father and I don't really know what she needs, and I think the property tax filing is overdue. We got something in the mail, and Johnny said he'd help, but he doesn't know what he's looking at." I let her finish. Then I said, "Okay," she said. "Can you just take a look at it and tell us what to do?" And here's where I surprised myself, because I didn't get angry. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. I felt something quieter than that. Something that had been building for a long time finally settling into place. I said, "Mom, I actually can't. I've got a full patient load and I'm still in recovery. I won't be able to help with the property anymore." She said, "What do you mean you can't? You've always handled it." I said, "I know, but I can't anymore." She said, "This is because of the money, isn't it?" I said, "I think you should hire a property manager. It'll cost a little, but they'll handle everything. Dad has the name of an accountant who can help with the tax filing." She started to say something about how they'd expected me to be there for the family, and I let her talk. And when she paused, I said, "I love you, Mom. I hope you get it sorted out." And I hung up. My father called an hour later. He didn't ask how I was recovering. He didn't mention the surgery. He said, "Your mother is upset. Whatever point you're trying to make, this is affecting real things." I said, "Dad, I'm not trying to make a point. I'm just not available to manage the property anymore," he said. "After everything we've done for you." I thought about that for a second. I actually let myself think about it fairly, because I didn't want to be someone who only keeps score when it benefits them. They raised me. They kept a roof over my head growing up. They weren't cruel people. They were people who had made choices consistently over many years that told me something about where I ranked. I didn't think they were monsters. I just finally understood what I was to them. So I said, "I appreciate everything you gave me growing up. I do. But I need to focus on myself right now." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "This isn't like you, Rachel. And you know what?" He was right. It wasn't like the Rachel they'd known. That Rachel would have apologized by now. She would have said, "Okay, I'll just take one more look, just this once, just to smooth things over." But I'd had 6 weeks alone in my apartment with a bag of frozen peas on my knee, a payment plan I was covering by myself, and a lot of quiet to think in. I said, "Maybe I've changed." The property tax filing ended up being late. They got a small penalty, which my mother mentioned to me with a tone like I should feel responsible for it. I didn't say anything. They hired a property manager 3 months later. It cost them more per month than I'd ever asked them for in my life. That wasn't a coincidence. That was just the cost of what they'd had, made visible. Donnie's legal situation resolved. He's fine. He went back to doing whatever he does, and my parents went back to worrying about him and protecting him and funneling their energy in his direction. Some things don't change. But here's what did change. I stopped limping. My knee healed cleanly. My surgeon said my recovery was textbook, which I think is partly because I actually know how to do the exercises correctly. I went back to work full-time. I kept the 2 extra shifts for a while to rebuild my savings, and then I dropped them when I was comfortable again. I still talk to my parents. Thanksgiving, birthdays, some Sundays. It's different now, quieter, more careful, like we're all aware of something that can't quite be unsaid. My mother sometimes starts sentences that seem like they're heading somewhere, and then she redirects. I think she knows. I think my father knows too. They just don't have the language for what happened, because in their version of the story, they didn't do anything wrong. They made a hard call. They chose Donnie. That's what they had to do. And in my version of the story, I finally chose myself. That's what I had to do. The thing nobody tells you about moments like this is that they don't feel triumphant. Not exactly. What they feel like is relief. A very tired, very quiet kind of relief, like you've been holding a door shut against the wind for years, and you finally just let go, and the door blows open, and it's cold for a minute, and then your arm stops aching. My knee doesn't hurt anymore. I did that myself. I want to ask you something before I go, and I want you to actually think about it, not just scroll past. If your family looked at you and said, "You'll figure it out," after years of you figuring out everything for them, what would you do? Would you keep showing up? Would you walk away? Or would you, like me, do something that looked a lot like nothing, and quietly stop being the person they'd taken for granted? There's no wrong answer. But I think a lot of you already know what you'd want to do. And maybe the only thing stopping you is the voice that sounds like your mother saying, "This isn't like you." Maybe that's exactly the point.